Today I'm going to talk about defenses to the charge of drug trafficking in Alabama. The first thing is that if you get caught with a certain amount of weight, quantity of drugs, you can easily face a drug trafficking charge. And that can mean decades in prison. In fact, the minimum sentence for any drug trafficking case is 10 years in prison, of which at least 3 of those years have to be served day for day in the penitentiary. So we're talking about pretty serious stuff. So here I'm going to talk about some of the things that your lawyer will look at in trying to win a case like that. But first, you need to have a basic understanding of what counts as trafficking. So as I said, trafficking is determined by weight or quantity of various drugs. For example, marijuana, if a person has a pound or 2.2 kilos of marijuana, that's a trafficking amount. They would be charged with trafficking. They have 28 grams of cocaine, then that's trafficking. If they have 4 grams of heroin, that's the minimum for trafficking. And the most dangerous as far as weight is fentanyl, because if you have 1 gram of pure fentanyl, 1 gram of fentanyl means you're going to be charged with trafficking. So that's a sweet and low packet. It's not very much. In fact, if you have greater quantities of drugs, there's increase in penalties. And again, fentanyl, you have 8 grams of fentanyl, you're looking at life. Other drugs, it depends on the amount, but it increases with the amount of drugs that the person is accused of having. And as I said, mandatory minimums. So what's a lawyer going to do to try to help a person accused of this stuff? Well, there's certain defense strategies that are going to be pretty common and come up very frequently in drug trafficking cases. One of them is search and seizure. Your lawyer is going to say, hey, was the search of the home or of the car or something like that appropriate? For example, I had a case where I had a client, he was having a party, the cops thought he was a drug dealer. Well, somebody left, they took that person down, but they didn't find any drugs, so they didn't have any grounds to go in. They didn't wait, run into the place, they stick a gun in my client's face. We want to search. My client basically said something not as pleasant as kiss off. Well, they did search, but because they had entered the residence without a search warrant and without reasonable grounds or an exception to the search warrant, that evidence was kept out, or as lawyers say, suppressed, so he won. Another strategy that we look at is, what's the proof that the person had knowledge of the drugs? Another example from one of my cases. A woman gets delivered a sealed package. I think the box said speakers. Anyway, the cops had been following this through the postal system, and as soon as she closed the door, they burst in, grabbed the package, arrested the woman. Problem for the police was it was a sealed cardboard box that said nothing on it but speakers. So unless they could show that she had x-ray vision or they had some communications with her saying, oh, hey, please deliver these drugs, the case fell apart. My client was able to walk out of that without a conviction. Another issue that comes up is on an informant case, what is the credibility of the informant? A lot of informants, let's face it, they're wanting to work up some case of their own. They, had a case in federal court where there was a guy doing very serious stuff. Well, his credibility was very suspect, which benefited my client. So if you have an informant, your lawyer is going to try to cross-examine the informant or a jailhouse snitch or whatever to show that they're not worthy of belief. Issues come up. Did the informant plant the drugs to get out of the situation they're in? So these are things that will be looked at. The other thing that is not raised as commonly, but is an issue, is chain of custody. What's a chain of custody? Chain of custody means that whatever drugs were seized allegedly from the person and the drugs that were tested at the lab have to be shown to, with reasonable probability, have been the same thing. So, if drugs magically change from marijuana to cocaine, well, obviously, and that doesn't usually happen, but there are issues that happen with the chain of custody, and sometimes there's even other issues. I had a client who was charged with marijuana, and it was right at a pound. He said it was less than a pound. Well, when they seized it, they weighed it. It was a pound. But by the time of trial, it weighed less. Now, that wasn't a chain of custody. What had happened was, with heat and time, a lot of the water weight had evaporated. So because it now weighed less than a traffic amount, my client was able to avoid a conviction for drug trafficking and mandatory prison. So there's a moral to this, and the first one is get a lawyer as quickly as you can. You want to act fast. Your lawyer may do things to preserve certain evidence. They may be able to start building a case right away. There's a lot of things that a lawyer can do, and the earlier, the better, because we need time to think about it, look at it, and all of those things. The other thing is that you need to be aware of is there's a good chance that either you or your loved one, if you're accused of trafficking or they are, is going to wind up sitting in jail for a very long time. Judges and Alabama law permits them to set really high bonds on trafficking case. It's not unusual to see somebody charged with trafficking have $1 million or even $1.5 million bond on a trafficking case, which means for almost everybody that they cannot afford to get out of jail. They sit there. It might be that they're sitting there for 18 months, 24 months, even longer. And so prosecutors use this as a pressure point because they'll say to the person accused, to their lawyer and to the person accused, tell you what, he's been in there 24 months. I'll give him a sentence at 10 years split. He's going to have to serve 3, but he'll be out in a year. And a lot of folks, whether they're innocent or guilty, if they're sitting in jail, if they spent 2 years in jail, are going, oh, well, I can get out in a year, or I can, roll the bones and go to trial, but I could be spending decades if I lose. So even sometimes innocent people are going to go, I'm not taking that risk. Pragmatically, I just want to get out of here. I can barely stand a year, but I'll do it to get out and not risk a greater sentence. So that's something that happens. But what do? You contact a lawyer. If you're in a legal jam here in Alabama and you want our help at Siegel and Siegel, the number's below. Give us a call. If you want to be nice to us and you liked this video, if you would, give us the thumbs up. And if you want to see more of these videos, I try to do them about once a week, but if you want to see more of these videos, hit the subscribe button. And if you have comments or questions or anything like that, please feel free to put them down below. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video to both be enjoyable and entertainable, if that's a word. Thank you for watching.